Colonizing space is undeniably one of humanity's longest-lasting and most ambitious dreams. However, with the rapid development of technology, this feat might not be as impossible as we initially thought, especially since we're one step away from colonizing the moon, with Mars being our next stop in spatial conquest. This also promises to be one of our permanent habitats in the future, and with the recent discovery of water on Mars's surface, these similarities have only been amplified even more, and with them grew the interest of possible conquest of the Red Planet. But there was a question that imposed itself, and that is, how hard could conquering Mars actually be? Well, not that we'd want to ruin your dreams, but conquering Mars will undeniably be very hard. In fact, comparing the colonization of the moon with colonizing Mars is like comparing making scrambled eggs for breakfast against a full-on banquet. It's simply incomparable. You see, despite the apparent similarities between our own planet and the Red Planet, these two entities have very few things in common. And even these common points are only hypothesized as of now. As a result, the techniques as well as the technology that is used on Earth and that is planned for Moon's colonization simply cannot be used on the Red Planet. Now, there are various reasons behind this inability to use these utilities, as well as a lot of reasons why it will simply be virtually impossible to conquer Mars at the current. The first thing is Mars's unforgiving surface. You see, despite the planet being seemingly similar to Earth, Mars's surface is considerably different to that of our planet. Many people imagine Mars to be a desolate version of Earth that once used to house quite a bit of water that resembled our own planet. However, according to recent studies, this was never the truth. Yes, Mars used to house water on its surface, which seems to be confirmed by the large pockets of water that have recently been discovered. However, this does not really matter, as the possibility of Mars ever housing any form of life is virtually impossible. Furthermore, unlike Earth, Mars doesn't have tectonic plates. Instead, the planet's surface resembles a membrane similar to that found on an egg, which means that the outside layer of the planet was and is rather fragile. This seems to be confirmed by the fact that Mars has quite a bit of scarring on it, with the most notable scar being Valles Marineris. As a result, the desolate expanses of Mars are much more embossed compared to Earth, making the hypothetical creation of a colony a big problem. However, none of these issues are nowhere as severe as the fact that the weather on the Red Planet is simply way too harsh for any real possibility of it being colonized. First of all, the minimum temperature can fall as low as -225 degrees Fahrenheit, which can't be naturally encountered on Earth. Not to mention that the wind itself is extremely prominent and problematic, and let's not also forget the constant storms that ravage the surface. Finally, and probably most importantly, the radiation from the sun is also very different to Earth. The Martian surface is exposed to both UVC radiation and higher doses of UVB radiation compared to the surface of the Earth. As a result, everything needs to be specifically developed and designed for the Martian surface, which is easier said than done, as we still have quite a bit of limited info on the planet itself. More importantly, the logistics of reaching the planet and delivering said technology is still a very big problem, as we're yet to find a way to reliably reach the Red Planet. On the other hand, colonizing the moon is considerably easier for a couple of reasons. First of all, let's tackle the elephant in the room, and that's the fact that we've actually been to the moon. We practically know everything about our satellite, which makes the whole colonization process much more predictable than Mars. And speaking of predictability, compared to Mars, the moon's weather is very predictable, or rather, predictably non-existent. There are very little variables on the moon's surface when it comes down to external factors, which makes it ideal for constructing various utilities on its surface. And let's not forget about the fact that the construction process itself will be much easier on the moon than on Earth. Why, might you ask? Well, because of the gravity. You see, the moon's gravity is, as you probably know, several times weaker than the Earth's gravity. 6 times weaker, to be precise. Now, what this means is that the constructions themselves will have considerably lesser strain from gravity, making them much easier to create on a larger scale compared to Earth. Sure, the technology used will prevent us from exploiting these benefits at its fullest in the beginning. However, the fact that we have one less thing to worry about when conquering the moon is still a very welcome thing to hear. Oh, and one more thing. The moon is much closer to Earth than Mars. Some 600 times closer. This means that it'll also be logistically much simpler to conquer the moon compared to Mars. Now, with all of these negatives up front, you're surely thinking that the colonization of Mars is just a ruse made up by large companies and that it will never happen. Well, that actually might not be the case, because even though we're experiencing quite a bit of issues at the moment, the Red Planet is still a very promising first checkpoint in our space exploration mission. You see, despite its bad weather, despite the fact that it's as predictable as a feral cat, Mars still houses quite a bit of resources that are absolutely necessary for humans, especially in space. Water in particular is something that, as you might have noticed, is pretty scarce in space, and to have a literal well of water just sitting there 140 million miles away from Earth is definitely quite a bit of a logistical easement, wouldn't you agree? Now, with all of this in mind, you shouldn't exactly expect Mars's colonization to come soon. It'll take decades before we can even think of actually exploring Mars. Ironically enough, in his Sea of Lies, Elon Musk did actually say something truthful a few years ago about conquering Mars, and that is the fact that he'll already be long gone when we actually conquer it. So, by that logic, you and I are bound to have a few gray hairs by the time the first human expedition reaches it. Oh, still, we have to say that despite the long wait and the long ETA, we're practically on the brink of expanding humanity into space. After all, what is a few decades of waiting more when we've been waiting for tens of thousands of years already? Not a lot, let me tell you. Not a lot.